Okay, so here we go. So I've got an HTML file here open, and I've got a link that I've created to a CSS file, and I've also linked to a JavaScript file. Okay, now those files I haven't created yet, and so I'm doing this in Sublime Text now. So in order to create those, I need to create a new file and just basically save it, and I'm going to call it styles.css, and then create another file, save it as script.js. Okay. And so now I'm going to make a boss battle here, and I've already saved some image files, and I've got, let's see, I've got boss battle Vigar, and I've got some Mega Man pictures here. And so I'm going to use those, but I've created a separate directory called images to store those. And I'd recommend that you organize your files in the same way. Okay. And so here, I want to first think about how do I want to lay out my game. All right. I want to have my guy on the left hand side and the enemy on the right hand side. You can always change up the order and that, but if that's the layout that you want, I'm going to start by creating the structure of my divs and then use CSS to put those in the positions that I want. So I'm going to create a div, and this is going to be let's call this container, because it's going to contain all of the divs, all of the elements in my game. All right. Now, in there, let's also make another div, and I'm going to call this top row, because I'm thinking that I'm going to lay it out as a top row first, and then in the bottom section, that's where I'm going to have a description of what's happening in my game. All right. So I've got a top row, and then I've got a bottom row. All right. What you call the IDs, again, can be whatever you like. That doesn't really matter. But then inside that top row, now I'm going to have two more divs, one for Mega Man, one for Vigar. All right. And so I'm going to call this one Mega Man, and there's Vigar, and inside there I'm going to have images, Mega Man dash, what did I call it? stand.png, and then inside Vigar I want to have an image, images, and I'm just going to copy and paste that name there. This has to be exact, and it has to include the extension of your image. If not, you're not going to see it. Okay. Now let's see where we are at. So now I've got them. They're pretty big, and they're not in the position I want. So let's make them in the position we want. So now I'm going to jump over to my CSS, and I want to start applying them. Now I want to make this top row, I want the elements inside that to be in line, and this is where we can use that display inline, flex grid inline thing, property. Okay, so we've got flex. Is it inline? No, it is flex. Flex dash grid, is it? I feel like it's something different. Inline. No, that's not right. Now, when you're in doubt, you can always look up a property. So we've got flexbox, flexbox grid. Let's see. Here we go. So display flex. There we go. And then we can do flex direction row. That sounds pretty good. Let's try that. Or we could even do inline flex. That's a built-in one. But if I do flex, and then it was flex direction row, let's go back and see. And there we go. Now we've got it in line. Lovely. Now, I also want them to be centered. All right. So if I do text align center, that doesn't really do anything. If we put something in there, sometimes that can actually align things inside of that div, but I have a feeling the amount of space where each of these elements are using isn't going to allow for that. So just to see how much space our divs are actually taking up, I'd recommend that we add a border so that we can see it. So I've got Mega Man, and I'm going to just put a 1 pixel border on him. And for Vigar, same deal. There we go. And if I want to make it so that I can actually tell the difference between them, we can change the color of the different divs so we can see, all right, whatever's red here, this red outline, that is our top row, and the black outlines are Mega Man and Vigar. Okay, there we go. Now, if let's say I want to center the whole thing. There, I believe there's also, with a flex box, it does allow us to do a center row as well. Or actually, that kind of works too, doesn't it? Justify content. And this just to show you, I'm intentionally doing these searches for you so that you can see how you guys can be searching and checking for what the display properties are. Okay. Now, they're right close together. I want to separate them out a little bit. We can do that by adding margin. Okay. And so I'm going to actually add a class onto each of these guys. I'll just make the class called cars for characters. And to refer to a class, rather than using a hashtag, we'll use a dot. And now I'm going to add a margin. Now margin adds distance, adds space around the element. So it separates itself from other elements that are nearby. Now we can give it a single property. So if we did 20 pixels, then that would add 20 pixels of space around the top, right, bottom, and left. And so we can see if we refresh, it's actually not going to do it. I suspect that has something to do with our flex direction. We could also do a padding. Margin should add separation between them, but I believe that because of the flex and justifying content, it's not quite doing that. Let's try adding some padding, and you can, even that's not seeming to make any difference. That's, oh, I know why. That's because I didn't save my HTML where I applied the class. There we go. So that the margins does work. And if that's not enough, we can increase that, and that increases it. It looks like there's more space here than the bottom because it's actually applying 40 pixels on each of them, which means there's 80 pixels between them there. Okay. If you wanted a different amount of space on the top than the sides, we could add a second value. And the first value, so let's say I did 15 pixels, that would make it so it's 15 pixels top and bottom, 40 pixels on the side. So when we refresh, we should see now just 15 pixels there, top and bottom, but there's 40 pixels on the sides. Okay. Now for Mega Man, I think he's a bit too big, especially if this is supposed to be a battle. So I'm going to give him a height, and we don't want to just actually do a height on the div. We want to go Mega Man image, so that we're changing the style of the images inside the div. Okay. If I just applied the height, changed the height on the div itself, it wouldn't actually shrink him. But I'm going to make him, let's say, 100 pixels high. Woo, that's really small. Maybe that's a little too small. Let's go 200. There we go. And I want him to be at the bottom. I don't want him flying up there. So let's do a vertical line, bottom, and see. No, that's not going to help. Sometimes maybe I have to do it to the image itself. No. Okay. We could do a couple things now. We could add margin to the top of our image. Let's try that. There we go. That kind of works. And then we can just keep increasing it. There. Now he's at the bottom, and Vigar is much bigger, but he's facing the wrong way. So let's flip him around. To do that, we want to apply style just to the image of it, and I believe there's something to do with an image scale. But again, I forget what the exact property is. So let's go CSS flip image, and let's see what we got. Let me go to the first link. That's kind of cool. So here we are, transform scale x -1. That's exactly the property I want. Now this one they've put inside of a hover, which means that it only applies it to it when they're hovering the mouse on it. I don't want that. I want them always to be flipped, in which case all I have to do is put a transform scale x of -1, and let's see if that works for me. There we go. Pretty cool. All right. Now I've got those guys there. I don't have a health bar, and I don't have any buttons or actions. Down here, I want to this is where I want the description to be. of what's happening. Okay, and I just realized that because my monitor is so big, I should probably shrink this down so that you can see that it is actually all centered. There we go. All right. So let's make, so in our bottom row, all right, let's have, we want to have some text happening in here. Okay. Now let's add some styles, bottom row, and I want to do some padding. Now the difference between margin and padding, margin adds space on the outside, padding adds space on the inside. So we should be able to see it. If we added padding onto our characters, let's say I did 40 or maybe 60 pixels of that. Now when I refresh, look for the space around our image, between our image and the edges of it. Look at that. The spaces between the boxes, the borders of our div stayed the same, but the space between the images and the edges where the border is, that increased. So that's what I want to do down here, because I don't want the text right up close to the edge. All right, I'm going to remove that because I don't actually want that much. So I'm going to do I'm going to start with the 20 pixels, and here I'm going to set my font because I don't want the normal default font. All right, and let's set the size to be 20 point. Maybe I'll start with Arial. Okay, here we go, and let's put some initial text in here. One tag that is one you should get familiar with is P, standing for paragraph. Okay, it's a nice way of organizing your content. It automatically adds a paragraph space between paragraphs. There we go. So if I refresh, there we go. Now normally, something like this, it's more of a title, isn't it? It should be more pronounced. So rather than paragraph, I might use something like H1. H stands for header. 1 is the size. There's actually H1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And we can add styles to change each of them. By default, though, all it does is increase the size of the font and it makes it bold. All right. So there we go. Right now, it's looking pretty good. It's looking a bit more like a game, which is great. Let's say maybe to the left here, I want to show the stats of Mega Man. To the right, maybe the stats of Vigar. Maybe I want a health bar, something like that. So let's do that. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another div, and I'm going to give this one mega stats, and I'm going to also give it a class of stats. And the reason for that is I'm going to use a class so that I only have to set the property once for it to apply to both Mega Man stat box and Vigar's, but I still need an ID so that I can change the specific content of that div separate from Vigar's stats. So that's why I have both. Okay. So this one, I'm going to call it Vig stats, and again, give it a class of stats. Okay. Let's add in another CSS. and maybe I'll give it a width of maybe 200 pixels. And let's give it a border of 1 pixel solid and a border color of maybe blue. I'm gonna remove the borders later on. Right now I'm just putting them there so that I can see exactly how much space they're taking up. Eventually I'm going to remove them. Okay. Now right now that's not really that wide. Let's go a little bit bigger, like maybe 350. Okay, that's a little better, especially because I can shrink my page and it's still going to be okay. Okay. All right. So now what do I want to have inside there? Well, there's a couple things that I would want. First of all, I'm thinking that I want it to say health, and then on the next line I want to have it to have the health bar. Okay, I don't want health to change, but I do want the health bar to change. Okay, so I'm going to put health there, and maybe what I'll do is maybe I'll use a tag called a span. What's the difference between a span and a div? In many ways they're not much different. Usually we'll use span just for holding a single word or a single sentence, kind of like it's often used for labels, things like this, whereas div is more used for actual areas and sections on our page. Okay, but we essentially use it in the same way, and so I'm going to give it a class of health label, and then have a closing span. And now I'm going to have 2 divs. One, I'm going to the outer one, I'm going to give it a class of HP border, and then the inner one, I'm going to give it an ID and a class, and the ID is going to be Megaman HP. The class is going to be HP bar. All right. Again, these names, you don't have to use the same names. You can use whatever you want. But the reason why I'm giving Megaman HP a class and an ID is so that with an ID, I can refer to that individually, separate from Vigars, but I can also give it an initial style of the same width, same height, and I only have to do that once. And so, oops, I just realized I misspelled label, didn't I? There we go. And this one is going to be Vig HP, but otherwise that's going to be the same. All right, let's style it out. So we've got a class of health label. Let's make it a font of maybe 18 point Arial, and let's make it bold for font weight. Okay, and then what's next is HP border, and it's a class, so I'm using a dot, HP border, and I'm going to give it a width of, do we want the full width there? Oh sure, why not? Let's start there anyway, and let's go 30 pixels high, and I'm going to give it a border of 1 pixel solid. Maybe I'll go actually 2 pixels, no, 3 pixels solid, and a border color of black. Now HP bar, I'm going to do that as well first. so that we give it an initial value of 350, and I'm going to give it a background color of maybe green, let's say, and I'm also going to give it a height of 30 pixels. I want it to be exactly the same as the HP border. Okay, both are saved. You know they're saved because there's an X there. Now let's see what we've got. Lovely. We've got health. We've got the width. It's going a little bit outside there, so I could probably shrink it up, the width, a little bit. Maybe I'll go 300 instead of 350. Oops, wrong one. There we go. And that's looking pretty good. All right. And now, in terms of height and moving it down, let's so health label. Well, let's add. I'm going to add a margin to the top of that, to the health label. Because if I add a top margin to that one, since it's above the health bar itself, that should also push the health bar down as well. Okay, and let's go. Now these are how big? They're pretty big. So let's go a margin top of maybe 200 pixels, let's say. No, that's not gonna do it. So I'm have to work on getting that guy vertically aligned, and after that, then I'm going to add in some buttons. Maybe I'll put in some buttons underneath here on Mega Man's side, so that you can actually do some attacks, and that's where I'm going to jump into the JavaScript and start writing out my functions. Okay, but I'm going to stop this video now and then do that in the part 2.